Good morning, room 7 and room 13. It's Miss Pluis. Here we are, our 9th Pippi Longstocking reading. What's today? Tuesday. So on Thursday, Miss Land read to you and ended where they're about to go on a picnic. And we loved the responses as to what might happen with the picnic and the adventure that might await them. So let's find out. So remember, they came around the corner and Pippi was standing there with Mr. Nielsen, a stick, and a basket. At first, the children followed the country road a little way and then turned off into a field where a pleasant little footpath wound its way between birches and hazel trees. By and by, they came to a gate, and past it lay an even lovelier field. But right in front of the gate was a cow, and she didn't look as if she intended to move. Annika shouted at her, and Tommy went bravely forward and tried to shoo her away. But she didn't move an inch, and just stared at the children with her big cow eyes. To put an end to it all, Pippi laid the basket down, went forward, and lifted the cow away. It lumbered off through the trees in confusion. "Imagine cows being as pig-headed as that," said Pippi, jumping with both feet over the gate. "And what's the result? The pigs get cow-headed, of course. It's really disgusting to think about." "What a lovely, lovely field!" cried Annika with delight, climbing up on all the rocks she saw. Tommy had taken along his knife, the one he'd got from Pippi, and he cut sticks for both himself and Annika. He cut his thumb a little too, but that didn't matter. "Perhaps we ought to pick some mushrooms," said Pippi, breaking off a beautiful red toadstool. "I wonder if it's eatable," she continued. "Anyhow, it certainly isn't drinkable, that much I know. So there isn't any other choice but to eat it. Perhaps it's all right." She bit off a big piece of the toadstool and swallowed it. "It was," she pronounced with delight. "We certainly ought to cook some of these another time," she said, throwing the toadstool high over the treetops. "What have you got in the basket, Pippi?" asked Annika. "Is it anything good?" "Oh, I wouldn't tell you for all the tea in China," said Pippi. "First, we're going to find a good place where we can set it out." The children eagerly began looking for such a place. Annika found a big flat stone, which she thought was just right. But it was full of crawling red ants. "And I shouldn't want to sit down with them, 'cause I don't know them," said Pippi. "Yeah, and they bite," said Tommy. "Do they?" said Pippi. "Bite 'em back, then." Then Tommy caught sight of a little glade between two hazel bushes, and that was where he thought they should sit. "It isn't sunny enough for my freckles to thrive there," said Pippi, "and I do think it's nice having freckles." A bit further on lay a little cliff which was easily climbed. On the cliff was a sunny little ledge just like a balcony. It was where they sat. "Now close your eyes while I set everything out," said Pippi. Tommy and Annika shut their eyes as tight as they could, and they heard Pippi opening the basket and rustling with paper. 1, 2, 19, now you can look," said Pippi finally. So they looked, and they shouted with delight when they saw all the good things Pippi had set out on the bare rock. There were lovely little sandwiches of meatloaf and ham, a whole pile of pancakes sprinkled with sugar, little brown sausages, and 3 pineapple puddings. For you see, Pippi had learned a great deal from the cook on board her father's ship. "Oh, gosh, what fun it is to have a holiday," said Tommy through a mouthful of pancake. "We ought to have it all the time." "No, tell you what," said Pippi, "I'm not all that fond of cleaning. It's fun, sure enough, but not for every day." At last the children were so full they could hardly move, and they sat quietly in the sunshine and simply felt good. "I wonder if it's hard to fly," said Pippi, looking dreamily over the side of the ledge. The cliff dropped sharply beneath them, and it was far to the ground. "Going down ought to be possible to learn," she continued. "It must be lots harder going up. But then one can begin the easy way. I think I'll try." "No, Pippi!" cried both Tommy and Annika. "Oh, dear Pippi, don't do it, please, please." But Pippi already was standing at the edge. "Fly, you flat, fly, fly," and the flat fly flew, she said, and just as she said flew, she raised her arms and stepped right into the air. After a half second there was a thud. It was Pippi hitting the ground. Tommy and Annika lay on their stomachs and looked fearfully down at her. Pippi got up and brushed her knees. "I forgot to flap," she said easily, "and I had too many pancakes in me." Just at that moment, the children discovered that Mr. Nielsen had disappeared. He had clearly gone off on an outing of his very own. They agreed that they had seen him sitting happily chewing the picnic basket to pieces, but during Pippi's flying practice, they had quite forgotten him, and now he was gone. Pippi became so angry that she threw one of her shoes into a big, deep pool of water. "You should never take monkeys along when you go somewhere," she said. "He should have been left at home to mind the horse. It would have served him right." She continued walking into the pool to fetch her shoe. The water reached her waist. "One should remember to wet the hair, too," said Pippi, and ducked her head under the water. So long it began to bubble. "There, I won't have to bother about the hairdresser this time," she continued with satisfaction when she reappeared at last. Then she walked out of the pool and put her shoe on, and they marched off to look for Mr. Nielsen. "Listen to the squuffling when I walk," laughed Pippi. "It says squaff squeep in my clothes and squip squip in my shoes. It's funny." "I think you should try it too," she said to Annika, who was walking her pretty way with her fair silky hair, pink dress, and little white leather shoes. Some other time," said the wise Annika. They went on. "I get really angry with Mr. Nielsen," said Pippi. "He does this all the time. He ran away from me once in Surabaya too, and took a job as a butler with an old widow." "Oh, that isn't true, you know," she added after a pause. Tommy suggested that they should each go separate ways to search. Annika was a little afraid and didn't want to at first, but Tommy said, "You're not a coward, are you?" That means, like, coward's the opposite of being brave. And of course, Annika couldn't stand for that, so all three children went their separate ways. Tommy went across a meadow. He didn't find Mr. Nielsen, but he did find something else. A bull. Or rather, the bull found Tommy, and the bull didn't like Tommy because it was an angry bull who was not in the least fond of children. With a terrible bellow and lowered head, he rushed forward, and Tommy let out a wild howl of distress, which could be heard through the whole wood. Pippi and Annika heard it too, and came running to see what it was. Tommy had meant by his howl. The bull had already caught Tommy on his horns and had tossed him high up into the air. "What a rude bull," said Pippi to Annika, who was crying, quite distressed. "One simply can't act that way. Why, he's dirtying up Tommy's white sailor suit. I'll have to go and talk some sense into that silly bull." And she did. She ran forward and pulled his tail. "Excuse me for interrupting," she said, and as she was pulling rather hard, the bull round and saw a new child, which he also wanted to stick with his horns. "As I said, excuse me for breaking in," said Pippi again, "and excuse me for breaking off," she added, and broke off one of the bull's horns. "It's not fashionable with two horns this year," she said. "This year, all the better bulls will have only one horn, if any at all," she added, and broke off the other horn too. As bulls have no feelings in their horns, this one didn't know that his were missing. He still tried to butt her, and if it had been anyone but Pippi, there wouldn't have been anything left of that child but applesauce. "Stop tickling me!" cried Pippi. "You can't imagine how ticklish I am. Ha ha, stop, I'll laugh myself to death." But the bull didn't stop, and finally Pippi jumped upon his back to get a moment's peace. It wasn't a particularly peaceful place, though, for the bull didn't like having Pippi on his back. He made the very worst sorts of twists and turns to get her off, but she just held tight with her legs and sat where she was. The bull rushed back and forth in the meadow and bellowed so that smoke came out of his nose. Pippi laughed and shouted and waved to Tommy and Annika, who stood at a distance trembling like aspen leaves. The bull turned around and tried to throw Pippi off. "Look at me dancing with my little friend," sang Pippi, sitting fast. Finally, the bull became so tired that he lay down on the ground and wished there were no children in the world. For that matter, he had never seen why children were necessary at all. "Had you thought of taking your afternoon nap now?" asked Pippi politely. "I shouldn't disturb you then." She stepped down from his back and went over to Tommy and Annika. Tommy had cried a little. He'd been hurt on one arm, but Annika had wound her handkerchief round it so it didn't hurt any longer. "Oh, Pippi," cried Annika, full of excitement when Pippi came. "Shh," whispered Pippi. "Don't wake the bull. He's sleeping, and if we wake him, he'll just be cross." Mr. Nielsen! Mr. Nielsen, where are you? She shouted the next minute in a shrill voice without bothering about the bull's afternoon nap. We have to go home. We're going to stop there because your response this week, room 7 and room 13, is to think where they might find Mr. Nielsen or what Mr. Nielsen was doing, or maybe why he thought he wanted to run away. Can't wait to see your responses, and we'll chat soon, guys. Have a great day.